Hello and welcome to Casper College's Chicago Turabian Style Citation and Formatting Review. We're going to start with getting behind the difference between Chicago and Turabian. Chicago is a complicated form of citation. It has different versions for professional use or student use. And Turabian is the title or the name of the student version of Chicago. So it was a condensed or simplified version created by Kate Turabian, and it's typically used by students. So if someone says Chicago or Turabian, typically they are the same thing and they're used interchangeably. The first thing we're going to look at is the title page, which starts, of course, with the title. It's going to be in all caps at a couple of lines down from the top of the page. After that, you're going to have 5 to 7 blank lines, and then the author's name, the title of the course that you're writing this paper for, and the date that you complete or the date you submit that paper. Sometimes colleges will also request that you include the degree that you're working towards, or sometimes the title of the college department that you're turning this paper into. So make sure to double check for extra requirements. Citations are the next thing that we're going to focus on. They're very important. They are a way to give credit to the owners or creators of information, whether that idea is from a book, a movie, a video, a website, a Twitter post, a personal interview, a newscast. All that information belongs to someone, and you have to give them credit. So different ways that you can include those pieces of information in your work. You do that by paraphrasing, which is using your own words to rephrase someone else's idea, but matching their level of detail and their length. Or you can summarize, which is restating their idea, but reducing it and combining it to only the essential parts. Or you can directly quote that person, use exactly the same words that they used. All different types, all three of these, you still have to cite them. It doesn't matter if you've used your own words. If the information came from someone else, you still have to cite it. So make sure you keep track of what information is yours and what information comes from someone else. Then we're going to look at how Chicago formats those citations. There are two different methods of citation that Chicago can use. There's author date, which is similar to APA style, and notes bibliography, which is what most people are probably familiar with when they think of Chicago. That's what we're going to focus on today, as it's the more common method. It involves using a superscripted number in the text itself to note information borrowed. That note matches a footnote at the bottom of that page, which gives the information about the author. There's also a bibliography page where you list all of the sources used, and your citation is going to include both elements, both the in-text part with the footnote and the bibliography page. So here's an example of that in-text citation with the footnote. The blue highlighted part here you have is the in-text citation. Here in the end you have a little 1 after the punctuation. You have the end of the sentence, a period, and then the little number 1. That corresponds with the bottom of the page, which shows this information here. You have the author's name, title of the article, title of the magazine, and other information. This is the two pieces of the in-text citation that you're going to have, the number and the footnote. If you have multiple citations from the same source, you can shorten the footnote in that reference to make it a little bit simpler and easier. So here this is the same citation, same source from the previous page, but I used another piece of information in a different sentence. So I have a new number. Then you don't repeat the numbers. This is number 7 because it's the 7th time I've used someone else's information. And because it's that same person, I use their last name, part of the title, and then the page number for that citation. Next, we're going to look at how those in-text citations are formed. You start with the author's first name, then follow it with the last name. After that, it sometimes gets a little different depending on what type of information you're citing. For a book, you're going to include the title, which is going to be italicized here. Then you have, in parentheses, the place of publication, a colon, the publisher, a comma, the year that book was published, and the page number, like this example here. For an article, you're going to have almost the same information, but with a few additions. You still have the first name and last name, but then you have the title of the article, and it's going to be in quotation marks. Then the title of the journal is italicized, followed by the issue number and number of that magazine, if it includes that. Then you have the date in parentheses. If it's an online source, you also include the web address, like this example here. For web sources, you can sometimes encounter some problems with citation. It might be missing one of those elements that you're supposed to include. The beginning is the same. If you have an author, you're going to list first name, then last name, title of the source, the name of the website. If there's a publishing organization that's separate from the website, then you list that person too, the date that was published if included, and if it doesn't include a publishing date, this is one of the problems you can encounter, sometimes there's no date, you can use an access date. Like this example here, Margaret Wong, the access date was September 7th, 2023. That shows when I accessed this article because there is no publishing date to include. If there's not a single person that you can call the author, sometimes you can use what's called a corporate author. And that would be the name of a well-known, well-regarded organization, something like the American Heart Association, or a government office like the Department of Defense or something like that, the World Health Organization. Those would be considered corporate authors. And so if that group has produced information, you can use them as the author if there's no particular person. If there is no corporate author, if it's just a random website or someone's blog and you can't call it a corporate author and you don't have a specific person's name, you use the title of the article next here. This last example, bio, by the letter black. So because there's no person and there's no corporation we can call the author, here we just have the article title. So sometimes you can have those problems, and those are some ways, especially with web sources, that you can work around them to still cite that source correctly. Then we're going to look at the bibliography. So the bibliography is a separate page at the end of your essay, and it contains a complete list of every source you've used. Every source that you cited in the text ought to be on the bibliography. Then the bibliography has that as the title here. It's going to be centered on that page. Then there's an empty line in between the two. Then your citations. The citations are all alphabetically organized. They have this hanging indent here, and they have one empty line between the citations. They're not double spaced on this page. They just have that empty line. So we're going to look at the order of that information because it's a little different than what goes in the footnote. The main difference is the order of the names. Most of the rest of it is fairly similar. You have to pay attention to the punctuation, but the elements are similar. The main thing is you put the last name first, followed by a comma, and then the person's first name. So that's a backwards order from what's in the footnote. Then you'll see, like in this book example, you'll have things like there are no parentheses around the publishing information, but it's in the same order as it is in the footnote. Same thing in things like an ebook. It's going to be the same. So pay attention to those punctuation differences and the order of the names, and make sure you put the correct one in the bibliography and the correct one in the footnote section. Next, we'll move on to some other general guidelines for Chicago. It typically recommends the use of past tense rather than present or future tense, unless you're specifically referring to something that is a future proposal, like talking about a future research project or further studies to be conducted, something like that. Otherwise, use the past tense. It's also recommended that you use third person rather than first person or inclusive language. So things like we, I, you, and us you want to avoid using, and instead use third person addresses like they, people, researchers, consumers, etc. Headings and other information elements like how to put charts in or how to include graphs doesn't have specific rules. The manual recommends developing a clear and consistent organization or hierarchy of headings and tables, and they do have some suggestions for how you can do that, but there's not necessarily strict rules on how to include that information. Next, we're going to look at how you include or how you format some of that stuff, and we're going to be looking at Microsoft Word to do that. So, to include those citations, those footnotes for in-text. In-text citations. So to get that, after your work, you put your punctuation, then you can hold down the Control, Alt, and F key, and that inserts a footnote automatically. Up at the top, you'll see this little tiny number 1, and then at the bottom of our page, we have the other little tiny number 1. This is where you would put your citation information. And this is actually the citation that goes in the bibliography, so the information's out of order, but you can see what it looks like there. There is your In-text citation, it corresponds there. If we insert another one, we can do them back to back, it automatically goes to number 2. So that's a handy thing. You don't have to manually number your own citations. Word will do it for you, which is handy. Then if we look down here for a hanging indent, that's the other thing that sometimes gets confusing. So for a hanging indent, you want to either select your single section of information or the whole page if you have a full page of bibliography entries. You can select the whole page, go up to the paragraph box, and it will open this little dialog box here. In this second section it says indentation. You want to go to the special spot and drop down and pick hanging from that. Then at the bottom you can click OK or apply, and it will do that hanging indentation for you. So that hanging indentation, oh dear, it will look like this. You have the first line left, and then the following lines of that citation are indented a ½ inch. So it's opposite of what a normal indentation looks like. So that's how you get both the in-text citations and the hanging indentation for your bibliography page. All right, that is the end of our presentation. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to visit the Casper College Writing Center or our website or Moodle page, and we have more information about citation and Chicago style, as well as other citation styles if you get stuck. Good luck!